Okay, welcome to today's show where we are going to dive into the topic of birth control. So, as you know, this show is built to help us understand our bodies at a deeper level and really embody our highest version of ourselves. In order to do that, birth control is something that actually is quite a necessity. I think most or maybe all women would agree with me that at this point in time, birth control is essentially a basic right for women. But today's episode, I really want to dive into the history of birth control. We're going to talk about the founding mothers of birth control and where they went right and where they went wrong, because we want to zoom out here and understand if we're going to put a pill in our mouth every single day that's controlling our fertility. I think it's really important for us to understand where that pill came from. One, so that we can actually make the choice of which type of birth control is right for us. If we have time in today's episode, we're going to dive into birth control itself and the different types of birth control. If we run out of time, then that will be a separate episode. We'll see how far I get today. But really, I want to take this time to understand where we came from and how we got to where we are so that you can use that knowledge to help you make the best choice for yourself and so that we can thank the women, the many women whose shoulders we stand on today, who've given a lot, as we'll learn in today's episode, to help us get to where we are. So, let's talk about first, why do we care? So, birth control has empowered women to have agency over their lives in a very important way. So, with control over our fertility comes higher education, economic advantages. In fact, research shows that up to a third of financial gains in wage over the last 60 years for women have been directly impacted by access to birth control. So, this is much more than just family planning. This is just basic women's rights, human rights, our ability to create and be and become who we want to be in the world hinges in a big way on our ability to plan our lives. And although I believe that no matter where you are in your life, if the moment comes where you become a parent, um, we step into what that role looks like for us. Whether you're ready or not ready, maybe there's never really a good time to be ready, but the research shows that when women are able to choose, when they become mothers, they're able to make, mm, I don't even want to say better decisions, because I think that the mothers who didn't really want to be mothers yet are maybe some of the best mothers out there. I think it's more that when we have a little bit more time and space to plan our lives and plan who we want to be, we have more intention around how we raise our children. Not to say that it's better, but maybe for us it feels better. So, that is one of the big reasons why birth control and family planning is so integral to where we are today, just as a society. Family planning has also allowed us to improve health outcomes, birth outcomes, and healthier pregnancies over time. So, those are all really important as well. Now, let's rewind the clock and go back to the earliest forms of birth control that we know of. So, some of the oldest documentation is from 3000 BC in ancient Egypt and Crete, where we found evidence of condoms actually made from fish bladders and intestines, as well as some linen. So, this tells us that for what, many thousands of years, humans have been trying to control their fertility in a big way. The next, after that, most recent kind of progression in 1850 BC, we found papyrus scrolls that contained instructions that women had written for each other on how to make a cervical cap using honey, acacia leaves, and lint. So, extremely clever. Women are so resourceful when we want to achieve something. And this really speaks to just how creative and also how amazing it is for us to pass this wisdom and this knowledge on. That's what this show is about, is teaching our daughters, teaching the future women of the world how to have more control over their lives, how to live their lives in a more empowered and embodied way. And what I mean by that is truly getting to choose, having all of the knowledge they need to make the most educated choice for them. And I think that's where we failed a lot in the past, and we fail all the time in birth control now, and actually having informed consent about what women are putting in their body. And so understanding where this came from is a huge piece of that puzzle. So I'm not going to well, I'll try not to get on too much of a soapbox here, but please, how long in human history must women fight for their reproductive rights? I mean, that's 3000 BC. We're looking at 5,000 years of documented evidence of us trying to control or have control over our own fertility. The fact that birth control is still locked up tight in the hands of old white men is absolutely mind-boggling. And if you're watching this, I'm probably preaching to the choir, but do remember that one of the biggest pieces of making change is speaking our truth. And so if you feel like this is an issue for you, or you know someone who's personally impacted, or you're just passionate about it like I am, then you can call your Congress people and write your senators and tell them, hey, this is super important. We have evidence to show that actually, as a society, we are more successful when we have control over our ability and our right to become a parent. Let's backtrack to our history of birth control story. So, as time went on throughout the early ancient BC times, and as well as the early thousands and into the up to the 1800s, basically, women continued to use different types of birth control. So we had barrier methods that we created where we literally put things in our vagina to try to stop sperm from reaching the cervix. We also used condoms, or the pull-out method was very common, as well as herbs to actually prevent ovulation. Some of these were effective, some of these not so much. At the beginning of the 19th century, so that means like around 1800, the US birth rate was one of the highest in the entire world, and women were having children at the rate of 8 per woman. So the average woman was giving birth to 8 children in her lifetime. That's insane. That is so much nutrient density taken from you. Research now shows that it's pretty optimal to wait about 2 years between pregnancies if possible so that you can replenish that nutrient store that pregnancy takes from us. It is a big, huge toll, not only to grow a human, but also to feed a human, whether or not you breastfeed. That can extend the amount of time it takes to recover nutritionally even longer. So, all that is to say, giving birth to 8 children, pretty insane. By the end of the 19th century, so the end of the 1800s, birth rate had finally come down to about 3 children per woman in the US. So that shows that over the course of those 100 years, the 1800s, women were so adamant to find a way to control their fertility, and that probably most women did not want to have 8 children. This was just the world we lived in, where unfortunately religion played a huge role, politics played a huge role, as well as just women's place in society. Now, in the early 1900s is when we reached what we would consider the modern birth control movement. And this was in the US run by a public health nurse named Margaret Sanger, who was both pretty monumental in moving birth control forward, the birth control movement, and also a completely insane person. So she did some good things in helping to push the birth control movement forward by founding the first birth control clinic in the US, but she also took a very dangerous stance on eugenics. So I hope you know what eugenics is, but if you don't, it is basically a very deeply racist concept that implies that some people are better fit to have children, and that we should and could selectively choose our population based on those who have only desirable traits, or who we as a society have deemed are the right ones to continue to procreate. Hitler was deeply eugenic, right? He had a deep belief in eugenics as well. So we can see this is not an idea that we want ever to exist in the world again. If we can just lock it up in a box and never see it again, that would be fantastic. Although it is an important part of history, and it is important for us to understand where we came from. But what's important to understand about Margaret Sanger is there's still a question mark as to whether or not she truly believed it, or she used this as a turnkey, a lever, right, to push the birth control movement forward. Because as we now know, Margaret Sanger condemned herself to the wrong side of history by siding with the Ku Klux Klan, because she went to them and said, hey, you only want white people in the world. Well, we can use birth control to help control that. And so she endorsed a bill with support of the Ku Klux Klan called Buck versus Bell, in which the United States Supreme Court ruled that children could be sterilized. I'm sorry, people, humans of any age, could be sterilized without their consent if the government felt they were unfit to have children. So, utterly blood boiling, quite honestly. And this is why I'm very glad I live in this day and age. And we've come a little ways since then. We have lots of ways to go. But just the fact that this was ever on the table is shocking. And you can see how Margaret Sanger made some really big missteps in her path to try to get birth control widely available and endorsed. Now, she had a counterpart in Britain named Marie Stopes, and she published a book called Married Love, which argued for sexual fulfillment within marriage as well as sexual equality. So, she wasn't initially completely writing to fight for birth control, but Margaret Sanger came to her and said, "Hey, will you publish this chapter on birth control as well?" And from there, Marie Stopes became one of the more forward spokeswomen in Britain to help move the birth control movement forward. So, where Stopes fought for birth control under the name of physical freedom and sexual freedom in Britain, Sanger used the arguments of alleviating poverty and overpopulation, as well as, now we know, eugenics. Again, mind blown. Anger, yes, comes up, and gratitude that we don't live in that world for the most part anymore. But it is really important, I think, for us to understand that these are the roots of some of the birth control movement of where we are today. And thinking about the fact that many, many people were hurt in the process of birth control becoming what it is today is important for us to have gratitude and be thankful that even the mm, kind of subpar options we have are better than nothing. So, in addition to having a completely racist perspective of the world, Margaret Sanger also, unfortunately, some of these beliefs kind of infiltrated women's health in general and gynecology, and we see the trail of that today because unfortunately gynecology and women's health is still quite racist. When we look at the birth control options that are offered to Black women versus white women, especially in the US, they're different. All that is to say, we also need to understand that some of these beginnings of birth control perpetuated some of the racism that now exists within women's health in our medical field in the US and probably in many other places in the world. So we can thank Margaret Sanger for pushing birth control efforts forward and eventually founding the seeds of what Planned Parenthood has become today. We can thank her for that, for sure. And Planned Parenthood has proudly denounced Margaret Sanger and her beliefs. Um, so, so Planned Parenthood as an entity has done a really amazing things for the world. We don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's a terrible saying. I don't know why I said that. I'll never say that again. In 1936, birth control was made widely available to married women, but only in the states of New York, Connecticut, and Vermont. So, over the course of the next 30 years, it took until 1966 for birth control to actually become available in other states as well, and again, only to married women. And it wasn't actually until the 1970s that birth control was available to unmarried women. So, what happened between 1936 and 1966? Well, in 1948, the birth control pill was invented. And again, in an utterly racist and anti humanitarian act, a large scale human trial of the pill was conducted in Puerto Rico, where women were given the pill. They were told it prevented pregnancy. They were not told any of the potential side effects. They weren't told that there were any potential side effects or that the drug was in an experimental phase and they had actually never been tested on humans before. At the time, the level of hormones in the pill was 20 times higher than it is today. Now, our hormones in our body are measured in a scale of picograms and nanograms. That is tiny, that is minuscule. So, any small amount of hormone can make us feel radically different. It can completely affect our health and how we show up and how we feel every day. Any woman who's been on a birth control pill and immediately felt depressed, anxious, and potentially suicidal knows this is true. Hormones play such a huge role in our body. So to be given something that was 20 times higher than what it is today with a pill today that has all of those side effects, I can only imagine how horrific these poor women must have felt. Nevertheless, so that was about 1,500 women in Puerto Rico that were given the pill. And then trials continued throughout the 1950s and into the early 60s. And the drug was finally approved by the FDA in 1960. After many more countless women were tested, mind you, or had the pill tested on them. So, this is what I say when I say we need to understand where it came from for us to stand on the shoulders of our sisters who came before us, who gave so much to get us here. And so, while the birth control pill has empowered us in so many ways, as I mentioned, and has given us more financial freedom and choice and all of these beautiful things and sexual freedom, there was a price to be paid as well. And so by 1965, 5 years after the pill became FDA approved, 1 in 4 married women under 45 had used the pill. So 25% of women in the US who were married raised their hand and said, "Give me that. I want it now. I do not want to have babies today." So this is a good thing, right? Women were starting to finally have more control over their life and how it progressed. And with time and lots of advocacy, more forms of birth control were slowly approved throughout the 1990s, which brings us to today, where we have a plethora of different birth control options available to us, ranging in efficacy, ranging in side effects, ranging in health effects, all of which we will talk about because I think this is kind of the initial background of where birth control came from, which is leading up to the more actionable part of this conversation, which is how do you pick a birth control that's right for you? And if you felt terrible on one before, what do you do? Where do you go from here? That's all to come. So then, if we look at history as we reach the 2020s, which is basically now, we are actually watching access to birth control and abortion slip away from us. So I am sad to say that birth control is essentially in the same place it is today as it was when my mom was my age. I can only hope that it is radically different for my daughter, that we, women now, the elders, we will be the elders, the grown-ups, right? We're the grown-ups, can take control over this situation and change it for our children. Because it will make me very sad if my daughter at 31 has to say still that her birth control and her rights to when she chooses to have a children are still being held in the hands of old white men. So, what should be a fundamental right is something that women have had to continue to fight for time and time again, that we are still fighting for time and time again. And I share all of this with you because, in order to understand where it is today, again, we have to understand where we've been. So, the honest truth, in my opinion, is that birth control methods still suck. They don't really serve us well. They mask a lot of our internal magic. I think I have a deep rooted belief that when we master our hormones, when we master our cycles, we are able to tap into power we maybe didn't know that we had because we feel different at different parts of our cycle. And there are different parts of us that come out to play depending on what is going on in our hormonal harmony or maybe not harmony in the background. And so figuring out how to utilize those different hormonal balances to our benefit rather than our detriment is a gift that women have. And birth control masks that in a lot of ways. And so I think that birth control pill being created by men, obviously, they don't know what we feel like and they don't care. They didn't care that we have natural cycles, that maybe there was something beneficial about these natural cycles, that we maybe don't want to mask them all. And so there are some options out there that don't always do that. I still think that generally most options suck. I think this should entirely be on men. It's their responsibility, not ours. That's a different story. But it is insanely important. It is a basic right, and we have to be proud of ourselves for how far we've come. Um, and for fighting a battle that we should have never had to fight. So when we take a pill, when we use any form of birth control, we have to understand that there are many thousands of women who came before us who sacrificed much of their health for us. And we want so much to control our reproductive health that we will sometimes take impractical or harmful drugs to maintain that control. So we're strong and we're amazing, and we will do hard things to get us where we want to be.